Okay, let's set the scene. Picture this. It's 1775. We're on a Dutch slave ship, the Haas du Langzaam, sailing somewhere off the coast of Africa. And in the ship's logbook for July 19th, there's a brief entry that records a tragedy.
The entry just says, "A girl slave fell overboard and drowned." And right next to these, well, pretty clinical words, the first mate sketched a simple icon, a skull and crossbones. This tiny little mark is the only memorial for an unnamed girl who lost her life, and as historians would soon discover, it was far, far from the only one.
So what are these things? These icons? They're all over the logbooks of the Dutch slave trade. You see crosses, hourglasses, skulls with wings. It's like a kind of a secret code, a whole visual language for death. But what does it all really mean? And what could it tell us about the people who drew them? And more importantly, the people they represent?
Well, the answer comes from some amazing historical detective work. The first ever comprehensive analysis of these symbols, which uncovers a whole lost visual world.
Researchers dug into 109 logbooks, all from a single, powerful Dutch slave trading firm called the Middelburg Commercial Company. These pages, stored away in an archive in the Netherlands, hold over 1,400 of these hand-drawn death icons. And when you start studying them systematically, a hidden pattern begins to pop out.
It turns out the folks keeping these logs were pulling from two main symbolic traditions. The first one is pretty straightforward, Christian symbolism, the cross, representing faith and redemption. But the second, and much more complex tradition, is something called memento mori.
Memento mori. It's a Latin phrase, and it literally means, remember you must die. Sounds pretty grim, right? But it was a hugely popular artistic theme in Europe at the time, especially in the Netherlands. The whole idea was to use symbols to remind people that life is short and that focusing on your spiritual piety is way more important than any earthly wealth.
This engraving from 1626, it's pure memento mori. You've got the skull, that's the ultimate symbol of death, obviously, the wilting flower showing that life decays, and crucially the winged hourglass, a reminder that your time is always, always flying away. These kinds of symbols were everywhere, and they helped the Dutch sort of reconcile their massive colonial wealth with their Calvinist faith.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how this visual language actually changed over time. In the 1740s and 50s, that simple Christian cross was the most common death icon you'd see. But then in the 1760s, right as the Dutch slave trade was hitting its absolute peak, something shifted. The memento mori symbol started taking over, and by the 1770s, the cross had pretty much vanished from these logbooks, replaced almost entirely by skulls and hourglasses.
But the most profound discovery from all this research isn't just what symbols were used, but for whom they were used. Because when you start to separate the icons for the European crew from those for the enslaved Africans, a really disturbing pattern starts to emerge. Just look at these two icons. They were drawn by the same person on the very same voyage. The top one is for a Dutch sailor, Willem van Humen. The artist drew him with straight hair. Now the bottom one is for an unnamed enslaved African man, and he's drawn with kinky hair. A clear, visual marker of racial difference is being sketched right into the official record of death.
And honestly, it gets even starker. In 23 of the logbooks they studied, whenever both crew members and enslaved people died on the same voyage, the crew received death icons, while the enslaved people received nothing at all. Not even a simple mark. Their deaths were written down in words, but their very humanity was denied a symbol.
This difference becomes crystal clear when we focus in on one really powerful symbol, the hourglass, the icon of time itself.
So on the left, you see a typical icon for a crew member's death, a skull and crossbones with an hourglass sitting right on top. It's a full memento mori statement, right? Mortality, the passage of time. Now look to the right. That's the icon for the enslaved girl who fell overboard. Just a skull and crossbones, no hourglass. And this wasn't a one-off. The hourglass was used consistently for the crew, but almost never for the enslaved.
So you have to ask, why? Why the difference? The researcher offers this just devastating interpretation. The whole symbolism of memento mori, of giving up your worldly possessions to focus on your eternal soul, was seen as completely irrelevant for people who were themselves considered possessions. They had no property, not even their own bodies, to renounce.
The symbolism of time and piety was a conversation they just weren't included in.
But as the 18th century started to wrap up, a new idea began to emerge in the pages of these logbooks. A little flicker of individuality, but again, only for some.
I want you to meet 4 sailors who died on a single voyage between 1783 and 1785. Their names were recorded, which was pretty typical for crew members. But the logbook keeper on this particular ship, the Gertruida and Cristina, did something, well, something pretty remarkable.
He didn't just draw a generic symbol. He appears to have actually drawn their portraits. I mean, look closely. The faces are distinct. You can see different chins, noses, hairstyles. These aren't just symbols of death anymore. They're becoming actual memorials for specific individuals.
This artistic shift probably reflects the rising influence of Romanticism, with its new focus on the individual and personal memory. But, and this is a huge but, while this new wave of humanity was extended to sailors like Willem van Hooyman, it stopped right there. On that very same voyage, 13 enslaved people died. They were all drawn with the same generic icon of a head with kinky hair.
Ultimately, when you take a step back, you realize these drawings in the margins are so much more than just a historical curiosity. For many of the 1.8 million Africans who died during the Middle Passage, buried at sea with no ceremony, these tiny, tiny marks are the only gravestones they will ever have. They are the final, and in so many cases, the only visual proof that they existed at all. Which leaves us with a final, pretty heavy thought. These icons reveal a system that meticulously recorded death while at the same time deciding whose life was worth remembering with a symbol of humanity and whose was not. So if a simple mark in a margin is the only proof that someone ever lived, what is our responsibility to their memory today?